Hello everyone, I'm the narrator, and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep more easily. So before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching this? Now, relax and let's get started.
The recurring dream. Every night, I dream I'm in an old, abandoned house. It sits deep in the forest, where towering trees obscure the moonlight, leaving only faint streaks of light filtering through the canopy. The house, even in my dream, appears strikingly vivid. Its peeling paint, thick layers of dust covering everything, and the distinct musty smell of time itself permeate every corner of my mind. My footsteps are always light, almost soundless on the rotting wooden floorboards. I know where I'm going, though I've never been there in real life. An invisible force pulls me along, guiding me through silent rooms where tattered curtains sway with faint breezes coming through gaps. The feeling of dread isn't an overwhelming fear, but a slow, creeping chill, like night dew soaking into my skin. It doesn't make me want to run. Instead, it compels me to explore further, like a mysterious whisper constantly echoing in my mind. The spacious living room, where a fireplace has long gone cold, now holds only gray ashes. The light from a broken window, at this moment, is just enough for me to see the ghostly outlines of old furniture. A rocking chair stands alone in the middle of the room, as if someone had just been sitting there telling a sad fairy tale. I pause for a moment, listening. There's only the wind whistling through the window and the gentle beat of my heart in my chest. Everything is so quiet. I can almost hear the dust settling. I continue on, through the long hallway with its crooked old paintings hanging precariously. The faces in the portraits seem to stare directly at me, their eyes holding forgotten stories. I stop in front of one portrait. The woman in it has a wistful, distant gaze. The hazy mist of the dream makes every detail soft, not too sharp, but enough for me to feel the presence of the past. Eventually, I always find myself in the attic. The old wooden stairs creak under each step, as if groaning under the weight of time. The air in the attic is thicker, more suffocating, yet it also holds an inexplicable curiosity. Light from a small window on the roof streams down, forming a weak beam on the wooden floor. In the corner of the room, there's always an old wooden chest, covered in dust and cobwebs. It's locked with a rusty padlock. Every night, I stand before that chest, reaching out to touch its rough wooden surface. I know there's a secret inside, a secret I've never been able to reach. The feeling of helplessness at not being able to open the chest always lingers until I wake up. But then, one night, it was different. I was still in that house, still in the attic, still in front of the familiar chest. The gloomy feeling still enveloped me, but this time, there was a change. As I reached out to touch the chest, a soft creak echoed. It wasn't the sound of decay, but the sound of a door slowly opening. The chest, gradually, ever so slowly, began to open. A small gap appeared between the lid and the body of the chest, revealing a deep, dark space inside. I held my breath, staring into that darkness. No light could penetrate it, yet I could sense something lying dormant within. I couldn't see clearly, but a strong urge made me want to reach inside. I extended my hand, reaching into the void. Immediately, I felt something cold and small nestled in my palm. A strangely familiar sensation, as if I had held it long ago. And then, with a jolt, I woke up. My heart pounded in my chest, beating so loudly I could hear it reverberating in my ears. I sat bolt upright in bed, my breathing ragged. My room was still dark, with only faint moonlight filtering through the window. But I couldn't deny the vivid reality of the dream I had just experienced. I looked down at my hand, and that's when I froze. In the palm of my right hand, a small object lay nestled. It was an old antique key made of brass with intricate patterns that had faded with time. It had a classic appearance, unlike any key I had ever seen. Its surface was cool to the touch, yet not rusty. This key? I had never seen it before. I held the key up, letting the moonlight fall upon it. It shimmered faintly, as if harboring an ancient secret. Its weight in my hand was real. This key was not part of the dream. It had crossed the boundary between the dream world and reality. A mix of surprise and confusion washed over me. How could a key simply appear in my hand after a dream? Was this a sign or an invitation? The question swirled in my mind, making it impossible for me to fall back asleep. I lay down, but my eyes remained wide open, staring at the key in my hand. The image of the abandoned house, the old chest in the attic, and the fear intertwined with curiosity were still vivid in my mind. Could this key be the key to that chest? And if so, what awaited me inside? Dawn gradually broke, casting the first rays of sunlight into the room. The key remained there, silently in my palm, as undeniable proof of what had happened. I knew from this night forward, my dreams would never be the same. That dream, now, had a new door, a door for which I held the key. And I couldn't help but wonder, where would this journey take me? The sleep paralysis. Visitor tonight, like many other nights, I drifted off to sleep gently. The weariness from a long day gradually faded, giving way to a dreamy, soothing sensation. I love that in-between moment, when the worries and troubles of life seem to vanish, leaving only a quiet space where the mind is free to wander. I dream. My dreams are often unclear, like disconnected, endless fragments. Sometimes they're beautiful scenes, familiar faces, but also at times strange, incomprehensible images, fleeting and then disappearing like a thin mist. I usually don't pay much attention to dreams, considering them random films that the brain unconsciously plays during rest. But then everything began to change. For a few weeks now, I've often woken up in the middle of the night. Not because of noise, not because I'm thirsty, or any physical discomfort. I wake up suddenly, as if an invisible hand had just vigorously shaken my shoulder. But when I open my eyes, the familiar, absolute darkness of the bedroom still surrounds me. At first, I simply thought I was having trouble sleeping. I tried to close my eyes again, seeking solace to fall back asleep. But there was a strange feeling, a vague unease that lingered in my mind, preventing me from finding peace. Tonight was no different. I woke up and immediately noticed the difference. The room was still pitch black, not a single ray of light piercing through the tightly drawn curtains. But something felt different. A terrifying stillness enveloped the space, as if all sounds in the world had simultaneously ceased. And then, I realized I couldn't move. A strange paralysis spread throughout my body. I tried to lift a finger, but it remained motionless. I wanted to turn over, but my whole body felt as if an invisible weight was pressing me down onto the bed. Panic began to creep into my mind. I had heard of sleep paralysis, about that terrifying moment when your consciousness is awake but your body is completely immobile. Was this it? My heart started to pound faster, rapidly, as if wanting to burst from my chest. I tried to take a deep breath, but my rib cage also seemed locked tight. A suffocating, choking sensation overwhelmed me, intensifying my anxiety. In the absolute darkness, another strange feeling began to emerge. I sensed a presence, not a sound, not a smell, but just a vague yet incredibly distinct feeling that I was not alone in this room. That feeling was concentrated at the foot of the bed, as if someone was standing there, silently observing me in the darkness. Even though I couldn't see anything, I could imagine an undefined shadow, a dense black mass looming at the end of the bed. I tried to scream. A terrifying scream caught in my throat. I strained, wanting to utter even a small sound, a faint whimper, but all I got was deafening silence. Helplessness surged, deepening my fear even more. In the complete darkness, I began to perceive. Gradually, a hazy image started to materialize at the foot of the bed, like a thick, black smoke slowly rising from the floor. It didn't have a specific shape, just an undefined black mass, yet it carried a strange, heavy, oppressive feeling. My heart seemed to stop as I realized it was moving. Slowly, very slowly, the black mass began to crawl up, rising higher and higher, like a grotesque tree growing in the dark. It made no sound whatsoever. Its movement was utterly silent, making the scene even more terrifying. And then, I saw the eyes. Within that undefined black mass, two glowing spots ignited. Not a gentle light, but a cold, burning flame. They stared directly at me, piercing through the darkness, penetrating my very soul. That gaze held a terrifying understanding, as if it knew all my secrets, all the deepest fears within me. I tried to close my eyes. It was futile. Even though my eyelids were shut tight, I could still feel that burning gaze fixed upon me. An extreme terror invaded me. I wished I could disappear, could dissolve into nothingness, escape this terrifying presence. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that this was just a nightmare, a figment of my imagination toying with me. I tried to banish the terrifying image from my mind, silently reciting prayers and chants I had heard. But when I opened my eyes again, it was directly over my face. The black mass had moved closer, very close. I could feel the coldness emanating from it, a bone-chilling, biting cold. And then, I felt its breath. A cold, damp gust of air washed over my face. It carried a horrifying stench, a rancid, decaying smell, like damp earth and rotting corpses. The nauseating odor assaulted my nostrils, making my stomach clench. Its face was right up against mine. Even in the darkness, I felt that terrifying proximity. I couldn't make out its features clearly, but I knew it was there, an evil, grotesque presence invading my personal space. I wanted to thrash, to push it away, but my body remained completely immobile, as if someone had bound me with invisible chains. All I could do was stare into the darkness, feeling the cold breath and the putrid smell engulfing me. Time seemed to stand still. Every passing second felt like an eternity. I didn't know what it would do next. Would it attack me? Would it harm me? These terrifying questions gnawed at my mind, instilling an unspeakable dread. In despair, I tried to focus all my will, summoning every last bit of strength to move even a single finger. I silently prayed, begging for invisible help. And then, a miracle happened. One of my toes twitched slightly. A tingling sensation ran down my spine. Gradually, the paralysis began to loosen its grip. I felt life returning to my body, little by little. I managed to close my eyes, then opened them. The dark shadow was still there, but it seemed to have receded slightly. Its burning eyes still stared at me, but the oppression had diminished somewhat. With a soft groan, I turned my head to the side. This time, I could move. A feeling of relief washed over me, as if I had just escaped a terrifying nightmare. I slowly sat up in bed, panting. The darkness in the room still enveloped me, but the sense of that terrifying presence seemed to have vanished. Only I remained, alone, in my familiar bedroom. I turned on the nightlight. The soft yellow glow spread throughout the room, dispelling the darkness and the cold feeling I had just experienced. I looked around. Nothing was out of place. Everything was as it should be. Was it all just a nightmare? But the horrifying stench still lingered somewhere, in the air, in my memory. It was so real I couldn't deny it. I got out of bed, went to the living room, and turned on all the lights. The bright light dispelled all shadows, but still couldn't banish the fear that haunted me. I went to the window looking outside. The silent night enveloped everything. Only the chirping of insects echoed from somewhere. From that night on, the middle of the night awakenings and the feeling of paralysis continued to visit me regularly. Each time, I felt the familiar presence at the foot of the bed. Sometimes I still saw the undefined black mass and those burning eyes, but it didn't always come close. Sometimes it just stood silently in the dark, watching me. I began to research sleep paralysis, reading articles, scientific studies about the phenomenon. I learned that it's a sleep disorder, where the brain is awake but the body is still in the relaxed state of REM sleep. Hallucinations can occur in this state, creating terrifying experiences, but logic couldn't completely soothe the fear in my heart, because the feeling of that presence was too real. The cold, the putrid smell, the burning eyes. It was all too vivid to be merely a figment of imagination. I began to dread nighttime. My bed, which was once a place of rest and relaxation, now became a place of potential horror. I found it difficult to fall asleep, and my sleep was often interrupted by these haunting awakenings. I tried changing my sleep habits, trying to create the most comfortable sleeping environment possible. I listened to soft music before bed, read books to relax my mind, but nothing seemed to change. The sleep paralysis visitor still regularly haunted me, bringing fear and helplessness. Sometimes, during an episode of sleep paralysis, I tried to communicate with it. Though I couldn't move or speak, I tried to focus my thoughts, sending silent messages. "Who are you? What do you want? Leave me alone." But in response, I only received terrifying silence and that piercing, burning gaze. I began to feel exhausted, both physically and mentally. Sleepless nights, haunting sleep paralysis episodes left me constantly tense and anxious. My life gradually became dominated by this invisible fear. I had considered seeking help from sleep specialists, or even those experienced in supernatural phenomena. But a part of me still hesitated. I feared that I would be labeled as crazy, or unable to find a satisfactory explanation. And so, night after night, I continued to live with the uninvited guest in my sleep paralysis. A terrifying shadow, a cold breath, a burning gaze, all have become an inseparable part of my long, silent nights. I don't know when this nightmare will end. I can only hope that one day I will be able to sleep a deep, peaceful sleep, without being woken by that terrifying presence again. Until then, I must continue to live with the fear, in the absolute darkness of my bedroom, waiting for the uninvited guest to reappear at the foot of the bed, and each time, once again, I fall into horrifying paralysis, helplessly watching the black shadow slowly approach. The sound from the walls in. The first few nights I didn't pay much attention. They were just very faint, vague scratching sounds, as if something was lightly scraping the plaster wall behind my headboard. My house was old, nestled in a quiet alley on the outskirts. Strange noises weren't uncommon. The wind whistling through window cracks, tree branches rubbing against the tin roof, or simply the house settling as the weather changed. So when I heard these sounds, I just dismissed them. Probably mice. Every night, as darkness fell and silence enveloped the room, those sounds would begin again. Initially, they were just sporadic, unclear noises, like a small creature exploring the world inside the wall. I've always been a deep sleeper, so I'd usually hear them vaguely before drifting back into slumber. I reassured myself that they were just harmless little mice, looking for food or a warm place to hide. Then, those sounds began to change. From random scratching, they gradually became clearer, seemingly more rhythmic. It was like something was scratching, but not randomly. There was a repetition in each sound, a regularity that made me start to notice. Instead of just scratching, it sounded more like tapping, gentle but persistent, tap by tap. The tapping wasn't loud, just enough for me to perceive its existence in the still night. At first, I thought I was imagining things, that my mind was trying to make sense of random noises. I tried to ignore it, closing my eyes tightly, counting sheep, or thinking about peaceful scenes to divert my attention from the wall. But the tapping remained. Every night, it would echo. Gradually, it became a familiar part of the night, and strangely, I began to listen to it. Not out of fear, but out of a vague curiosity, as if the tapping was trying to tell me a story that could only be heard in the quietude of late night. One night, the tapping became clearer than ever. It was no longer whispers of sound, but more solid taps, still gentle, but enough for me to feel a slight vibration on my pillow. It was no longer simply the sound of a mouse. The tapping carried a clear intention. I lay still, listening. The tapping continued, steady, relentless. There was a feeling as if it was trying to get my attention, inviting me closer. In the stillness of the room, the tapping grew a little louder, each tap like a beat, a reminder that something existed right behind the wall. An irresistible curiosity surged within me. Although I felt a slight chill, I wasn't absolutely terrified. Instead, there was a compelling urge, a desire to know what was creating that sound. I wanted to find out. I slowly sat up in bed, taking a deep breath to calm myself. The room was still pitch black, but I could feel my own breath and the gentle beat of my heart. I quietly slipped my feet onto the floor, taking slow, deliberate steps towards the wall. Each of my footsteps was very soft, as if I feared interrupting the tapping. As I drew closer to the wall, the sound became even clearer. It was no longer just simple tapping. There was something more complex in those sounds, a softness, a flexibility, unlike any mechanical tapping. I pressed my ear against the cold wall. Immediately, the sound became more alive. It wasn't just tapping. It was something else, something incredibly subtle, almost imperceptible, yet strikingly clear. And then I heard it, a whisper, very faint, very soft, like a passing breeze but echoing clearly in my ear. It wasn't a random whisper. It was a voice, a hoarse voice, as if it hadn't been used in a very long time. I held my breath, listening. A sense of dread began to creep in, not pure fear, but a slow chill spreading throughout my body. My heart pounded faster, no longer gentle rhythms, but strong, rapid thumps. The voice spoke again, this time a little clearer. It wasn't a language I knew, yet I could understand it, because it was a plea filled with desperation and longing. I kept my ear pressed against the wall, unable to move away. All my senses were focused on the sound coming from the other side of the wall. The darkness around me seemed to grow thicker, as if enveloping me and the hidden secret. The voice continued, this time with a tremor, a weakness. It was as if it was trying, with all its might, to convey a message, a cry for help. And then I heard the words I would never forget. A faint, chillingly clear whisper echoed from the other side of the wall. Let me out. Time seemed to stop. I froze. The blood in my veins felt like ice. My entire body trembled, uncontrollably. It wasn't a mouse. It wasn't the wind. It was something alive. Something trapped. Absolute terror finally washed over me, more powerfully than any feeling I had ever experienced. I pulled my head sharply away from the wall, stumbling back a few steps, tripping over the edge of the bed. My heart pounded like a drum, my breathing ragged and gasping. I stared at the wall in the darkness. It was still there, silent and unmoving, but now it held an entirely different meaning. Behind the plaster and paint, something was imprisoned. Something was begging me for release. I hastily turned on the nightlight. The weak yellow glow partially dispelled the darkness, but couldn't banish the terror consuming my mind. I stared at the wall, at the exact spot where I had pressed my ear. It was still a normal wall, no cracks, no signs of anything unusual. But I knew I had heard it. I sank onto the bed, my body still trembling. A barrage of questions swirled in my mind. What was in the wall? Why was it trapped? And why was it pleading with me? That voice, the weakness and desperation in it haunted me. Let me out. Who could say that? A trapped spirit? Some creature held captive? Or just my own hallucination? A product of anxiety and lack of sleep? I tried to calm myself. I took deep breaths, trying to slow my racing heart. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was just a dream. Or perhaps I was too tired, too stressed, and had heard things that weren't real. But the cold sensation of pressing my ear against the wall, the authentic tapping, and that clearly whispered voice, it was all too vivid to be just a dream. I couldn't fall back asleep. For the rest of the night, I sat on the bed with the light on, staring at the wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper echoing in my head. Let me out. The next day, I was still shaken. I tried to act normal, went to work, talked to colleagues, but my mind was always drawn back to my bedroom, to that mysterious wall. I tried not to think about it, but it was useless. The whisper had planted a seed of curiosity and fear in my heart. As night approached, I felt an unusual tension. I hesitated to enter my bedroom. The streetlights filtered through the curtain gaps, casting strange shadows. I tried to create a safe space. I turned on all the lights in the room, opened the window for fresh air. I lay down on the bed, but couldn't close my eyes. I knew it would come again. And indeed, after a terrifying silence, the tapping began once more. This time it wasn't as gentle as before. It was clearer, somewhat more urgent. The tapping didn't come from just one spot, but seemed to spread across a section of the wall, as if something was moving inside trying to find a way out. I lay still, listening. The fear was still there, but now mixed with an uncontrollable curiosity. That voice had changed me. It had transformed me from an indifferent person into someone desperately wanting to find the truth. I slowly lifted my hand, pressing my ear against the wall. The tapping immediately grew stronger, as if recognizing my presence. And then the voice spoke again. This time it wasn't a whisper. It was a faint, hoarse voice, but much clearer. Let me out, please. Help me. I felt my own breath heavy, ragged. I felt the desperation in that voice. It wasn't an evil entity. It was something in distress. My rational mind told me to leave, to run away, but a part of me felt a sense of responsibility. It was pleading with me. It needed me. I knew I couldn't ignore this any longer. It was time to find out the truth. I wouldn't be able to sleep peacefully until I knew what was trapped in that wall. The next day, I prepared myself. I looked for tools in the house, a hammer, a chisel. I knew I had to do something I never thought I'd do. As night fell, I sat before the wall again. The tapping resumed, steady, urgent. The voice reappeared, faint but full of hope. Let me out. I took a deep breath. I looked at the wall, at the spot where I believed the sound was coming from. I told myself I had to be strong. I didn't know what awaited me, but I knew I couldn't abandon it. With trembling hands, I picked up the hammer. I placed the tip of the chisel against the wall, right where I had heard the voice. I closed my eyes, counting down from 3, 3, 2, 1. And then I swung the hammer. A loud crack echoed, breaking the night silence. Fragments, of plaster crumbled, falling onto the floor. A small hole began to appear on the wall. I stopped, holding my breath, listening. The tapping had ceased. The voice was silent. A terrifying stillness enveloped the room. I slowly peered into the hole. The darkness inside was thick, nothing visible, but I could feel a cold draft emanating from within. I shone my flashlight into it. The light pierced through the hole, illuminating a small section inside the wall. And what I saw made me freeze. It wasn't as terrifying as I had imagined. There was no ghost, no strange creature, only a small empty space, a hollow compartment built into the wall. And in the center of that empty space, a small object lay still. It was an old doll, a porcelain doll, worn with age, with tangled hair and glass eyes that seemed to stare right at me. Its tiny hand lightly touched the inner wall, as if it had just been tapping there. And as the flashlight's beam fell upon it, I noticed something strange. The doll's lips were slightly parted as if it had just finished speaking. My heart pounded. Could this doll have spoken to me? A feeling of both relief, skepticism, and a chilling sense of unease. Had I been tricked by my own imagination? Or did this doll truly carry a soul, a trapped voice that had found its release through me? I reached into the hole, gently lifting the doll out. It was cold to the touch and carried an old scent, like the smell of time and forgotten stories. As I held the doll in my hands, I felt an unusual peace spread throughout the room. The tapping had vanished. The voice was silent. All the fear, all the curiosity seemed to dissolve into the air. I placed the doll on the bedside table under the nightlight. I looked at it for a long time. Its glass eyes still stared directly at me, but now they no longer held desperation or pleas. Instead, there was a stillness, a liberation. I don't know the true story behind this doll. Was it a forgotten keepsake of a child? Or was it truly a vessel for a soul, a trapped voice that had found its way out thanks to me? Whatever the answer, I knew one thing for certain. From this night on, I would have a deep, peaceful sleep, and I would always remember the sounds from the walls, the whispered, "Let me out," and the old doll that had found its freedom. It's a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things aren't what we imagine, but the mysteries waiting to be uncovered, even in the most hidden corners of life. I turned off the light, plunging into darkness. The tapping was gone. The whisper was silent. Only the stillness of the night remained, and a peaceful sleep awaited. The face in the window. That night, like many others, I curled up in bed, trying to find the peace of sleep. My apartment was on the 10th floor of an old building in the heart of Saigon. From the large window, I could see the city's dim yellow, lights still awake, the winding roads like glowing ribbons. The distant honking of cars blended with the rustling wind sifting through window gaps, forming a familiar symphony of nightlife. I've always been a light sleeper, so it usually took me a long time to drift into the world of dreams. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, trying to shake off the day's worries. In the stillness of the room, I could feel the slow rhythm of my heart and the warmth from the soft duvet. My eyes weren't quite shut. A small slit still allowed faint light from outside to filter in. I lay there, listening to the familiar sounds, waiting for sleep to knock. And then it appeared. A gentle tap, very faint, very vague. It came from the window, a thin, almost imperceptible sound, yet enough to catch my attention. I squinted slightly, listening. It must be just the wind. The night wind on high floors can be mischievous sometimes, perhaps blowing a dry leaf or a small piece of paper against the glass. I reassured myself with this thought, and tried to return to my initial intention of falling asleep. I lay still, listening. Moments passed, with only the wind still whispering outside. Maybe I had misheard. I closed my eyes again, trying to relax. My body, letting thoughts drift away. But then, it happened again. This time, the tap was a little clearer. A more decisive tap, as if someone was gently knocking on the glass with a finger. It was no longer the wind. It was a purposeful sound, a presence. A slight shiver ran down my spine. I opened my eyes, looking towards the window. Darkness, still, enveloped everything, with only the faint glow from distant streetlights casting a dim light. The window was still closed, the thin white curtain rippling slightly with the gentle breeze. I wondered, could it be a bird? A lost bird flying into the glass in the dark? This thought seemed more plausible than some other unusual presence. I remained still, listening. No more sounds, only the wind. I started to convince myself it was just the oversensitivity of a light sleeper. It must be the wind. Nothing to worry about. I tried to close my eyes again, but this time it was harder. That tapping, even though it only happened twice, had planted a seed of unease in me. I lay on my side, turning my back to the window, trying to ignore it. But then, I felt a strange urge, a feeling that something wasn't right, a compulsion to confirm, to see what it actually was. I wrestled with myself for a moment. Finally, curiosity won over vague fear. I slowly turned over, facing the window. The streetlights formed a weak streak of light on the glass. I squinted, trying to peer through the darkness. And then, it was there, a face, pressed right against the glass, a pale face, pressed tightly against the window, its eyes staring directly at me, even though I was 10 stories up. My body froze. Every nerve cell felt like it was encased in ice. My breath caught in my throat. My heart skipped a beat, then pounded wildly, frantically, as if trying to burst from my chest. A horrifying scream was trapped in my throat, unable to escape. Those eyes stared directly at me. They didn't blink. They were large, round, and had a strange color, like the color of a starless night. No pupils, no whites, just two deep black holes reflecting the faint city lights. The face was expressionless. It was completely lifeless, cold. The skin was waxy pale, and black strands of hair hung loosely around it, sticking to the glass like moss on a rock. No smile, no frown, just a terrifying emptiness. I lay still, motionless. My entire body trembled uncontrollably. My brain tried to process what was happening, but it couldn't. How could there be a face there? I was on the 10th floor, no balcony, no handholds. How could anyone be there? I squeezed my eyes shut tightly, trying to banish that horrifying image from my mind. I silently prayed, begged. This was just a dream. It must be a nightmare, an illusion caused by sleep deprivation. I opened my eyes again. It was still there, still the same face, still the same eyes, still staring at me, unmoving. The coldness from beyond the glass seemed to penetrate it, seeping into my skin. I felt a strange oppression, a sense of being watched, scrutinized, but not with curious eyes, but with eyes of understanding. I tried to lift my hand, wanting to cover my eyes, but my body was completely immobile. I felt as if an invisible force was pressing me down onto the bed. Helplessness surged, deepening my fear even more. Time seemed to stop. Every passing second felt like an eternity. I didn't know what it would do. Would it break the glass and come in? Would it attack me? These terrifying questions gnawed at my mind, instilling unspeakable dread. I stared into its deep black eyes, and I began to sense something else, not just fear, There was a strange coldness, an emptiness coming from that face, as if it wasn't a living being, but something that had died, had been forgotten long ago. And then I noticed there were water droplets on the glass right next to the face. Not rain, they were tears, large, clear tears, slowly streaming down the glass, but not from the eyes of that face. They came from behind it, from an invisible place. I held my breath. Who was crying? Who was there? In the quiet space, I felt a change. The face was no longer just a simple image. It seemed to be moving a little closer, as if wanting to touch me, wanting to cross the barrier of the glass. In despair, I tried with all my might to break free from the paralysis. I strained, putting all my will into moving. I wanted to jump, up, to run away, to do anything to escape this terrifying gaze. And then, a small movement. One of my fingers twitched slightly. The paralysis began to loosen its grip. I slowly regained control of my body. I tilted my head to the side, taking a deep, cold breath. I blinked, opened my eyes. The face was still there, but it had receded slightly, no longer pressed against the glass as before. It hovered in the air, a short distance from the window. I jolted up, my body trembling. I turned on all the lights in the room. Light flooded in, dispelling the hazy shadows. I ran to the window, pulling the curtain wide open. Outside, there was nothing. Only the night sky, the city lights, and empty space. No face, no sign of any presence. I pressed my hand against the glass. It was cold, dry. No tears. No trace of a face that had just been pressed against it. Was it all just a dream? An illusion born of fear? But the cold sensation, the vivid reality of those eyes, the tapping, it all still haunted my mind. I paced the room, unable to calm down. I stared at the window, at the space where that face had been. I couldn't fall back asleep. For the rest of the night, I sat on my bed with the light on, staring at the window. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of that pale face reappeared, its deep black eyes staring directly at me. The next day, I was still shaken. I tried to act normal, but my mind couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I wondered, had I seen something supernatural? Or was it just a hallucination of a tired person? I began researching strange stories, unexplained phenomena. I read about trapped spirits, about invisible entities. A part of me remained skeptical, but a part felt that what I had witnessed was real. As night approached, I felt an unusual tension. I hesitated to enter my bedroom. My bed, which was once a place of rest and relaxation, now became a place of potential horror. I tried to create a safe space. I turned on all the lights in the room, pulled the window curtains tightly shut. I even placed a few spiritual items I had been given on the windowsill as a way to reassure myself. I lay down on the bed, but couldn't close my eyes. I knew it would come again. I lay still, listening, waiting. And indeed, after a terrifying silence, the tapping resumed. This time, it wasn't a gentle tap anymore. It was a clearer, more decisive tap. Not from one spot, but seemingly from multiple points on the glass, as if there was more than one entity out there. I held my breath. The streetlights still shone through the curtain gap, casting strange shadows. I felt that familiar presence. On the other side of the window, I lay still, trembling. I tried not to look, but my eyes seemed to be drawn towards the window. And then I saw them. Not just one, but two faces. Two pale faces pressed tightly against the glass. Their deep black eyes stared directly at me. They didn't blink. They hovered in the air, in the darkness, looking at me with lifeless gazes. I screamed. This time, the scream escaped my throat, echoing throughout the room. I bolted up, retreating towards the headboard, clutching my head. It couldn't be. Not two. I closed my eyes, shaking my head frantically, trying to dispel the horrifying image. When I opened my eyes, they were still there, two faces staring at me. One face seemed smaller, like a child's, and one face was larger, like an adult's. They were pressed tightly together, with no space between them. And then, the most terrifying thing happened. One of the two faces, the larger one, slowly parted, its lips. No sound escaped, but I could feel its words, words that made no sound, yet echoed clearly in my mind, like a cold whisper. "We are here with you." I collapsed onto the bed, my body rigid. I couldn't take it anymore. This horrifying truth had pushed me beyond my limits. I lay there, staring at the two faces outside the window, at their deep black eyes. I didn't know who they were, what they wanted. I only knew that from now on, I would never be at peace again. The dawn light gradually broke, dispelling the darkness and those horrifying images. As the sunlight streamed into the room, the two faces slowly faded, dissolving into the air like a thin mist. I sat up, my body tired and exhausted. I looked out the window. The sky was clear blue, white clouds drifting lazily. The city was still bustling, as if nothing had happened. But I knew they were still there. They had found me, and I couldn't escape them. Every night, I lie in bed, waiting for the gentle tap, waiting for the pale face to appear outside the window, waiting for the deep black eyes to stare directly at me, and waiting for the cold whisper to echo in my mind. I no longer try to fight. I have accepted their presence. I have accepted that I am no longer alone in my 10th floor apartment, and sometimes, in the still of the night, I think I hear that whisper again, closer, clearer. You are not alone. And I close my eyes, trying to fall asleep, knowing they are still there, watching me, waiting. The antique doll. When I was a child, my grandmother, a woman with hair as white as spun silk and a gentle smile, gave me a special gift on my 7th birthday. It was an antique doll. I still remember distinctly the feeling when she placed it in my hands. It wasn't like the brightly colored plastic dolls my friends had. This was a porcelain doll with dark brown braided hair, large round blue eyes, and an exquisitely delicate lace dress that had faded with time. It possessed a unique beauty, a quiet charm, as if holding countless old stories. My grandmother said, "This little one has a soul, my dear. She's been in our family for a very long time." I was too young then to fully grasp her words, but I loved the doll immediately. I named her Alara. Every night I would hug Alara close, tell her my secret stories, and drift off to sleep with a strange sense of comfort. Alara became my closest friend throughout my childhood. Time passed, and I grew up. Childhood games gradually gave way to new interests. Alara, my dear friend from yesteryear, slowly became a cherished memory. I no longer played with her. Nevertheless, I couldn't bring myself to throw Alara away. She was a gift from my grandmother and carried too many serene memories. So one day, I decided to put Alara in the attic. My attic was a spacious area, dusty and filled with forgotten old items. It was a repository of memories, a place where time seemed to stand still. I carefully placed Alara in an old wooden box, covered her with a thin cloth, and then put the box in a secluded corner of the attic behind some old trunks and wooden planks. I thought that there, Alara would be safe, and I wouldn't have to worry about her anymore. Many years went by. I grew into adulthood, busy with work and daily life. Memories of Alara and the attic gradually faded. I almost completely forgot about the doll's existence, until a few weeks ago, when strange things started to happen. The first time was on a Sunday morning. I woke up and went to the kitchen to make coffee. And then I froze. On the dining table in the kitchen, right in the middle of the room, something was lying there. Something that shouldn't have been there. It was Alara. The antique doll with her braided hair and faded lace dress was neatly laid out on the wooden tabletop. She didn't look like she had been accidentally moved. She lay there, as if someone had just placed her down. My heart skipped a beat. I rubbed my eyes thinking I was seeing things, but no, it was definitely Alara, the doll I had carefully stored in the attic years ago. I checked the house again. The doors were locked. No signs of forced entry. I was the only one living here. How could Alara be here? A shiver ran down my spine. But then I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe I had forgotten, had inadvertently brought her down while cleaning something and then left her here. Or perhaps a stray cat had gotten into the house and been mischievous. Even though I didn't have a cat, I still tried to come up with some reason. I picked Alara up. She was still cold and heavy as ever. I took her back to the attic. This time, I placed her deeper into a corner, using a few more old cardboard boxes to shield her. I even put a stack of heavy books on top of the box to ensure she couldn't be moved. I thought, surely this time she'll stay put. But then, things continued. A few days later, I found Alara again. This time, she was on my dresser in my bedroom, neatly placed as if she had been there for a very long time. I took her back to the attic again, placed her back in the old corner, covered her even more thoroughly. I started to feel confused and a little anxious. Was I sleepwalking? Or was it someone playing a prank? But I lived alone, and no one knew where I had stored Alara. Things kept happening. I found Alara in different places around the house. Once she was on the sofa in the living room, her blue eyes staring straight at the turned-off TV. Another time, I found her sitting on the bookshelf, right next to my favorite novels. There was even one instance when I opened the refrigerator door to get a drink and nearly screamed when I saw Alara sitting there, neatly among the milk cartons and vegetables. Each time I found Alara, I took her back to the attic. I had tried everything to keep her there. I wrapped her in multiple layers of cloth, used string to tie the box tightly, and even taped the attic door shut. But it was no use. The next morning, Alara would appear somewhere else in the house, as if she were challenging me, playing a game of cat and mouse. My anxiety slowly turned into a vague fear. Alara was no longer an inanimate keepsake. She seemed to have a will of her own, a strange power. I started to feel watched, observed. Every time I entered a room, I would glance around, wondering if Alara was there. I no longer dared to hug her. When I held Alara, I felt a strange coldness radiating from her. Not the cold of an inanimate object, but a cold that seeped deep into my mind, as if she carried some secret. I started to have trouble sleeping. During long nights, I tossed and turned, listening to every sound in the house. I wondered if Alara was moving in the dark. Was she watching me while I slept? Until tonight. Tonight, I felt particularly tired. After a long, stressful day, I just wanted to fall into a deep, dreamless sleep. I double-checked the locks carefully. I even shone my flashlight into the attic, confirming that Alara was still in her box, well covered. I closed the attic door, secured the latch carefully, and then returned to my bedroom. I turned off the light, pulled the covers up to my neck, and tried to relax. My eyelids gradually grew heavy. The room plunged into silent darkness, with only faint light from the streetlights filtering through the curtain gap. I felt sleep drawing very near, and then I felt a gentle warmth, a familiar weight right beside me. It wasn't the coldness of the pillow, nor the rigidity of the bed frame. It was a softness, a gentle warmth, as if someone was neatly nestled right next to me. I held my breath. My heart started to pound faster, uncontrollably. I slowly, very slowly, reached my hand to the side. My fingers touched something. A small object, yet carrying a strange, chillingly familiar sensation. And then I felt the soft fabric of the lace dress and the hard porcelain of the head. I froze. The blood in my veins felt like ice. Slowly, very slowly, I opened my eyes. In the dim light of the room, a small figure lay neatly right beside me. It was tucked neatly under the covers, right next to me, as if it had been there all night. It was Ilara. Her large, round blue eyes stared directly at me. In the faint light, I could clearly see her eyes wide open, unblinking. She didn't look inanimate. She looked at me with an empty gaze, yet carrying a strange understanding, an understanding I couldn't explain. Absolute terror washed over me, more powerfully than any feeling I had ever experienced. I wanted to scream, to jump up and run away, but my body was completely immobile. I felt as if an invisible weight was pressing me down onto the bed. Helplessness surged, deepening my fear even more. I stared at Ilara, at her blue eyes. I felt a cold aura radiating from her, a bone-chilling cold, not the cold of an ordinary object, but a cold that seeped deep into my mind as if she were carrying a secret. And then I felt a change. Although she didn't move, didn't make a sound. I felt a very strong presence from Ilara, as if she was smiling. An invisible smile, yet it made me shiver. Time seemed to stand still. I lay there, motionless, staring at the doll beside me. She lay still, yet exuded a terrifying vibrancy. In despair, I tried to focus all my will to break free from the paralysis. I strained, putting all my strength into moving. I wanted to jump up, to do anything to escape this sight. And then a miracle happened. One of my fingers twitched slightly. The paralysis began to loosen its grip. I slowly regained control of my body. I jolted upright, sitting up in bed. My breathing was ragged and gasping. I turned on the nightlight. The soft yellow glow spread throughout the room, dispelling the darkness and the cold sensation I had just experienced. I looked down. Ilara was still there, still neatly tucked under the covers right beside me, her blue eyes still wide open, staring directly at me. I retreated towards the headboard, leaning against the wall. My heart pounded. I couldn't believe what I had just experienced. I reached out with trembling hands, gently lifting Ilara from under the covers. She was lighter than I expected, but carried a strange heaviness in my mind. I looked at her for a long time, trying to find an explanation. Could this be a prank by my grandmother, who had passed away? Or did Ilara truly have a soul, as my grandmother had said? I couldn't bring myself to throw Ilara away. She was my grandmother's keepsake, but I also couldn't live with this fear anymore. Finally, I made a decision. I wouldn't put Ilara back in the attic. I wouldn't try to hide her. I would keep her in a place where I could see her, a place where I could feel safer. I placed Ilara on the bedside table. I turned her face towards the wall so her blue eyes no longer stared directly at me. I didn't know if this would help, but I hoped it would bring me some peace. I turned off the light. The room plunged back into darkness. I lay down on the bed, closed my eyes. I felt a little more stillness. My heartbeat gradually slowed. Sleep came to me with difficulty. But this time, I no longer felt Ilara's presence right beside me. The next morning, I woke up feeling tired, but without the terror of the night before. I looked over at the bedside table. Ilara was still there, still facing the wall, silent, inanimate. I don't know the true story of Ilara. Is she a haunted toy, or just a strange phenomenon that science cannot explain? Whatever the answer, I know one thing for sure. My life has changed since Ilara started moving. She has taught me that there are inexplicable things, mysteries beyond human understanding. And I have learned to live with it, with Ilara's presence in my home. A strange presence, sometimes terrifying but also carrying a touch of memory, of love from my grandmother. I no longer try to fight Alara. I simply accept her existence. And I hope, one day, I will understand why she chose me, and why she wants to be so close to me. Every night, before going to sleep, I look towards the bedside table. Alara is still there, silent. And I, gradually, have learned to sleep more peacefully, knowing that my antique doll friend is still in the same room with me. Perhaps that's Alara's way of telling me that she doesn't want to harm me, but just wants to be near. Like in my childhood days, just as my grandmother once said, "This little one has a soul, my dear." The glitch in the reflection. That night, as usual, I stood before the bathroom mirror, preparing for my nightly routine. This was my most peaceful moment of the day, when all the noise from the outside world seemed to fade, leaving only me and the quiet stillness of the warm yellow light. The large mirror, with its dark wooden frame, had always been a familiar companion. I looked at my own reflection, a face a bit tired after a long day of work, eyes slightly drooping, and a gentle, almost unconscious smile. I picked up my toothbrush, squeezed on some toothpaste, and began to brush thoroughly. The gentle swish of the bristles on my teeth, the sound of water running from the faucet, and my own steady breathing were the only sounds breaking the silence. I looked into the mirror as naturally as always. I saw my eyes, my slightly messy hair, and the familiar movements of my hand holding the toothbrush. Everything was perfectly normal, even to the point of being mundane. I brushed my teeth slowly, savoring the feeling of cleanliness little by little. My mind began to drift, preparing for the sleep that was soon to come. I thought about the small things from the day, about a book I was halfway through, about plans for tomorrow. Everything floated by gently, relaxingly. And then it happened. Just as I was about to close my eyes to rinse the toothpaste, I saw it. A very small change, a fleeting moment, but enough to make me jump. My reflection in the mirror, it blinked. It blinked before I did. Only a fraction of a second, a moment so brief I wasn't sure if I had seen it correctly. It was like a minor, temporal glitch, an insignificant missed beat. I stopped. The toothbrush was still in my mouth, foam clinging to my lips. I stared intently at my reflection. My eyes were wide open, looking directly into the eyes in the mirror. Trying to control my breathing, I stood perfectly still, not moving an inch. I wanted to see if I had been mistaken. Was it the lighting? Or was I just too tired and hallucinating? My reflection stared back. The eyes in the mirror were wide and unblinking. It seemed to be waiting. I deliberately didn't blink. I wanted to test it. I wanted to see if it would blink before me again. I held my breath, trying to keep my eyes as wide open as possible, not blinking even once. Seconds passed. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The reflection still didn't blink. It just watched. A quiet stare, but one that was beginning to feel strange. A shiver started to creep in. It wasn't an intense fear, but a slow chill spreading throughout my body, as if someone had just poured a bucket of ice water down my neck. I wanted to look away, wanted to turn my back, but I couldn't. The eyes in the mirror held me captive, like an invisible magnet. I felt trapped, hypnotized by my own image. And then a slow change began to unfold on the face of the reflection. First, the corner of the mouth. It slowly twitched upwards, very slightly. A change so subtle it was barely noticeable, but I saw it. Then the upper lip. It slowly curved. And then the lower lip. My reflection began to smile. A very slow smile, very gradual, as if each facial muscle was being controlled separately, independently of me. That smile was not my smile. It wasn't the gentle, unconscious smile I usually saw. This was a horrifying smile. The corners of the reflection's mouth continued to widen, Slowly, gradually, they stretched sideways. They stretched the facial muscles, making the smile grow wider and wider, wider than my own mouth could possibly stretch. It was unnaturally wide, repulsively wide. The upper lip pulled up, revealing perfectly white teeth. The lower lip pulled down, exposing the bottom teeth. The entire mouth was like a gaping, deep gash on the reflection's pale face. And while the reflection was wearing that grotesque smile, my own face remained unmoving. My eyes were wide open, staring intently into the mirror. My breath seemed to have stopped. My body was stiff, unable to move even a muscle. An extreme fear, an infinite dread washed over me. I was trapped in that moment. I saw my own face, my face, utterly terrified, eyes wide to their extreme, pupils dilated with fear, teeth clenched, and right beside it in the mirror, a distorted version of me, smiling a ghostly, infinitely wide grin, as if it was mocking my fear. That smile just kept stretching on. It had no end. It had no emotion. It was just a vast, dark gash on the reflection's pale face. And the eyes in the mirror, they still stared directly at me. But now, there was a cold amusement in them. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, rigid. I wanted to run away, but my feet seemed nailed to the floor. I could only stand there, motionless, witnessing this horrifying scene. I felt a chill from head to toe. The cold wasn't from temperature, but from a primal fear, an awareness of something that didn't belong in this world. Time seemed to stop. Every passing second felt like an eternity. That smile was imprinted on my mind, every single detail. The unnatural stretch of the corners of the mouth, the lifelessness of the eyes. And then slowly, the smile began to shrink, as gradually as it had appeared. The corners of the reflection's mouth slowly contracted, the lips gradually closing. It wasn't a quick disappearance, but a slow, deliberate retreat. Finally, the face in the mirror returned to normal, back to being my own reflection. The tired face, the wide eyes, and the look of terror still clearly etched upon it. I took a deep breath. My breathing was ragged, gasping. I stumbled backward a few steps, bumping into the sink. I collapsed onto the bathroom floor, my body trembling, uncontrollably. I closed my eyes, shook my head repeatedly, trying to erase that horrifying image from my mind. I opened my eyes, looking into the mirror. It was still there, empty. Just a normal reflective glass. But I knew what I had seen was real. I crawled up, turning on all the lights in the bathroom. The blinding light dispelled all shadows, all hidden corners. I stared intently at the mirror, at my own reflection. My face was still pale, my eyes still wide, but that ghostly smile was gone. I couldn't fall back asleep. For the rest of the night, I sat in the living room, with all the lights on, trying to read a book, trying to do anything to chase away that haunting image. Every time I closed my eyes, that horrifying smile reappeared, unnaturally wide, its cold eyes staring directly at me. The next day, I was still shaken. I tried to act normal, went to work, talked to colleagues, but my mind couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I wondered, had I seen something supernatural? Or was it just a hallucination of someone? Too tired? I began researching strange stories, unexplained phenomena. I read about legends of mirrors, about entities that could live in reflections. A part of me remained skeptical, but a part felt that what I had witnessed was real. As night approached, I felt an unusual tension. I hesitated to enter the bathroom. The mirror, once an ordinary object, now became a gateway to terror. I tried to avoid looking in the mirror. I brushed my teeth hastily, only looking at the toothbrush, not daring to look up. I turned off the bathroom light quickly, then rushed out. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape it. The image of that horrifying smile was deeply ingrained in my mind. Every time I walked past a mirror in the house, I felt a shiver. I felt watched, observed, and sometimes in my peripheral vision, I thought I saw something. A fleeting movement in the reflection of a glass door or a light fixture. Something small, but enough to make me jump. In the following nights, I continued to brush my teeth in front of the mirror, but no longer dared to look directly into it. I would just glance, trying not to pay too much attention. I hoped that if I ignored it, it would disappear. But it didn't disappear. One night, I was bending down to rinse my mouth. When I looked up, I saw it. My reflection was not rinsing its mouth. It was standing upright, looking directly at me. And its eyes. Those eyes were smiling. Not the wide, gaping smile from before, but a smaller, more enigmatic smile. A smile that hinted at malice, at amusement. I froze. My breath again caught in my throat. And then, that reflection slowly, very slowly, raised a hand. It lifted its hand, its index finger lightly touching the glass, as if it was trying to reach out to me. And then I heard it. Not with my ears, but with my mind. A cold, whispering voice. You can hide. I burst into tears. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching my head. No way. This couldn't be real. I lay there, trembling, until the dawn light filtered through the window, dispelling the horrifying shadows. When I looked up, the mirror was back to normal. I knew I couldn't live with this anymore. I had to do something. I started researching how to cleanse mirrors, about ancient rituals to ward off evil spirits. I used to not believe in these things, but now I had no other choice. I bought sea salt, white candles, and some herbs. I prepared everything carefully, following the instructions I found online. As night fell, I stepped into the bathroom. My heart pounded in my chest. I looked into the mirror. It was still there, empty. I lit the candles, placing them around the sink. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls. I sprinkled sea salt around the mirror and then began to chant the incantations I had learned. I closed my eyes, trying to focus all my will. I felt a cold current emanating from the mirror, an invisible resistance. I continued chanting, louder, clearer. I tried to push it back, and then a crack sound, a small fissure. I opened my eyes. On the surface of the mirror, a small crack had appeared, a thin, root-like crack spreading from the center. I continued chanting. A second crack sounded, then a third. The cracks gradually spread, forming a web across the mirror's surface. I felt an invisible rage emanating from the mirror, a stronger surge of coldness, as if something was screaming in silence. I didn't stop. I kept chanting. I poured salt water onto the mirror, and then, with a loud shatter, the entire mirror broke into thousands of tiny pieces. The shattered glass fragments fell onto the sink, onto the floor. The flickering candlelight reflected on the shards, creating thousands of tiny sparkles. A cold gust of wind swept through the bathroom, carrying a strange scent, like the smell of damp earth and dissolution. I stood there trembling, but no longer afraid. There was an immense sense of relief. I had escaped it. I carefully cleaned up the shattered glass. I no longer kept any mirrors in my bathroom. From that night on, I never saw that face again. No more ghostly smiles, no more cold whispers. My bathroom is now without a mirror. It still feels empty, but I feel much safer. I still brush my teeth every night, but I no longer look into any mirror. I accept the truth that there are inexplicable things in this world. And I know I was lucky. Lucky to have escaped that strange reflection. It's a reminder that sometimes what we see every day can hide the most terrifying secrets. And sometimes to find peace, we have to break down barriers, even if it's just a mirror. I turned off the light, plunging into darkness. Sleep came to me more easily than ever before. No more terror, only stillness and a sense of safety I had found again. The midnight call that night, I had trouble falling asleep. The wind whistled through the old window cracks of my apartment building, carrying the damp chill of Saigon's night. I'm usually quite meticulous and always check my phone before bed. I always make sure it's fully charged, always set to silent only for the alarm. But tonight, something felt different. A vague unease lingered in my mind, keeping me tossing and turning. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe evenly, counting sheep as an old habit. The ceiling fan spun steadily, creating a gentle whirring sound, like a constant lullaby. I felt my eyelids grow heavy, and my mind gradually drifted into a drowsy state, on the border between waking and sleeping. And then, it rang out. A sharp, piercing sound, cutting through the still night. My phone rang. I jolted awake, my eyes wide open. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. This was a time when most people were deep in slumber. A call in the middle of the night like this had never happened to me before. My heart skipped a beat. The vague unease from earlier had now turned into a distinct sense of anxiety. Who could be calling me at this hour? Was something wrong? I reached out, fumbling in the dark for my phone on the bedside table. The phone screen emitted a pale blue light, illuminating a small part of the room, and I saw the number displayed. It was an unfamiliar number, a long string of digits, not a familiar contact from my phone book, nor from any network provider I knew. It started with a strange prefix, not from Vietnam. I stared at the screen. On one side was anxiety, on the other was curiosity. Could it be a wrong number, or an emergency from a stranger? Although there was a slight chill in my heart, I still felt a compelling urge to know who was on the other end of the line. With a slightly trembling hand, I slid my finger to answer the call. I brought the phone to my ear, holding my breath, listening. At first, there was only silence. A terrifying silence, as if the line was disconnected. I was about to say hello, but a strange feeling kept me silent. And then, the first sound emerged. It was a heavy, ragged breathing, a deep, uneven breath, as if someone was struggling to catch their breath after a long run. The breathing sounded very clear, very close. I frowned. Who was breathing like that? Why were they calling me? The breathing continued, rapid and laborious. It carried a heaviness, a weariness, but also something very raw, grotesque, as if the person's lungs were severely troubled, or they were in a state of extreme distress. I wanted to say, hello? Again, wanted to ask who was calling. But an unnamed fear prevented me from speaking. I could only lie still, listening to that breathing. The breathing steadily echoed in my ear, beat by beat. It wasn't a random sound. It had a very clear presence, as if the person on the other end was intentionally breathing into the phone for me to hear. And then, amidst those rapid breaths, another sound appeared. A giggle. A small, soft laugh, but one that carried a chilling coldness to the bone. It wasn't the innocent, joyful laughter of a child. It was a clear yet ghostly laugh, as if a child was giggling in the dark, hiding something terrifying. That giggle made me jump, a jolt running through my entire body. An extreme fear washed over me. My heart pounded wildly, frantically. I felt the hairs on my neck stand on end. A child? Why a child? I stared at the phone screen. The unfamiliar number was still there, and the breathing, the giggle still echoed from the earpiece. The ragged breathing began to change. It was no longer just steady breathing. It grew louder and closer, as if the person on the other end was moving closer. The breathing grew steadily louder, louder. It no longer sounded like breathing through the phone. It sounded as if that person was in my room. I held my breath, eyes wide open in the darkness. I listened. The breathing now became very clear, very close. It echoed in my ear as if someone was standing right beside my bed and breathing heavily, right next to my ear. And then The giggle changed, too. It was no longer distant. It rang out right next to my ear, chillingly clear. A childish, clear laugh, but containing an indescribable malevolence. A coldness enveloped me. I felt a cold breath on my ear, as if someone was leaning in close to my head and whispering. Although there was no voice, the breathing and the giggle created a vivid, terrifying presence. I felt threatened, hunted. I felt as if something invisible was standing next to my bed, staring at me in the dark and breathing heavily, giggling right next to my ear. I wanted to throw the phone away, wanted to end the call, but I couldn't move. My hand seemed glued to the phone. My entire body was stiff with fear. The breathing continued steadily, closer, louder. The giggle, too, like a mockery, a reminder that I was not alone. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push away the fear. I silently recited prayers, begged. This was surely a nightmare, a product of my imagination playing tricks on me, but that breathing was too real. That giggle was too clear. I opened my eyes. The room was still pitch black. I still lay there, motionless. And the breathing, the giggle, still echoed right next to my ear. Time seemed to stop. Every passing second felt like an eternity. I didn't know what it would do. Would it attack me, or simply stand there, tormenting me with its terrifying presence? I felt a surge of despair. I couldn't escape. Couldn't do anything. I could only listen to that breathing and that giggle, and feel its terrifying presence right beside me. And then suddenly, the breathing stopped. The giggle also fell silent. An absolute silence enveloped the room. I still lay there, not daring to move. My heart still pounded in my chest. My breathing was ragged, gasping. I waited for another sound, waited for an appearance. But there was nothing, only a terrifying stillness. I slowly took the phone away from my ear, looking at the screen. The call was still connected. The unfamiliar number was still displayed. I pressed the end call button. The phone screen turned black. The call had ended. I threw the phone onto the bed, turning on all the lights in the room. The blinding light dispelled all darkness, all hidden corners. I looked around the room. Nothing unusual. Everything was still the same. I bolted up, ran to the living room, and turned on all the lights. I walked through the entire house, checking every nook and cranny. Opened the closet, looked under the bed. Nothing. The doors were locked, no signs of forced entry. So, what had happened? I returned to the bedroom, collapsing onto the bed. My entire body was still trembling. A barrage of questions swirled in. My mind, who had called? What was it? Why did it do that? I couldn't fall back asleep. For the rest of the night, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, trying to read a book, trying to do anything to ward off that obsession. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the ragged breathing, the childish giggle, and felt the coldness right next to my ear. The next day, I was still shaken. I tried to act normal, went to work, talked to colleagues. But my mind couldn't stop thinking about that midnight call. I wondered, had I seen something supernatural? Or was it just a hallucination of someone, too tired and stressed? I started researching strange stories about mysterious calls. I read about legends of spirits, about entities that can communicate through phones. A part of me remained skeptical, but a part felt that what I had witnessed was real. As night approached, I felt an unusual tension. I hesitated to enter my bedroom. My bed, which was once a place of rest and relaxation, now became a place of potential horror. I tried to create a safe space. I turned on all the lights in the room, pulled the window curtains tightly shut. I no longer placed my phone on the bedside table, but left it further away, out of reach. I even placed a few spiritual items I had been given on the bedside table as a way to reassure myself. I lay down on the bed, but couldn't close my eyes. I knew it would come again. I lay still, listening, waiting. And indeed, after a terrifying silence, my phone rang again. This time, I didn't reach out to answer. I stared at the screen, at the unfamiliar number blinking. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to ignore it. Let the phone ring. But the ringing persisted, relentlessly. It echoed in the room, breaking the night's silence. And then, while the ringing was still going on, I felt a change. The phone's ringing in my ear, it was no longer distant. It was closer, as if the phone was moving closer. And then I heard it. The heavy, ragged breathing and the childish giggle. Both sounds came from the ringing phone, but they sounded as if they were right there in my room. I closed my eyes, clutching my head. No way, it couldn't be happening again. The breathing, the giggle grew louder, closer. I felt as if someone was standing right next to my bed, leaning in close to me. I knew I couldn't escape anymore. No matter what I did, it still found me. The call finally ended. A terrifying silence enveloped everything again. I didn't dare to open my eyes. I lay there trembling, waiting for an appearance, for a touch. But there was nothing, only silence. From that night on, I never heard the phone ring in the middle of the night again. No more mysterious calls, but I knew I was no longer at peace. Every night I lie in bed closing my eyes. I try to sleep, but I can't, because I still hear it, not with my ears, but with my mind. The heavy, ragged breathing and the childish giggle, they are still there. They still echo in my head. And sometimes in the still of the night, I feel a cold breath on my ear, as if someone is leaning in close to me and whispering chillingly, "We are here with you." I jolted up, my whole body trembling. I knew I was no longer alone, and I knew that midnight call was just the beginning. It was an invitation to something inexplicable, something that would forever be with me. I no longer believe in peaceful sleep. Every night, I sink into a restless world where breathing and giggling are always present. And so, I live with the haunting, not knowing when it will end, or if it will ever end. The new neighbor. That night, as usual, I lay on my old armchair in the living room, a hot cup of tea on the table, and an open book on my lap. I lived in a quiet residential area, where houses were close together yet had a certain separation. Everything always seemed slow and peaceful here. The sparse sounds of distant traffic, the rustle of wind through the trees, all formed a familiar backdrop to my tranquil evenings. I always found relaxation in these moments, preparing for a deep sleep after a long day. But lately, something had changed. The house next to mine, with its dark red tiled roof and small charming garden, had been empty for months. And then, about 2 weeks ago, a new family moved in. I knew because I'd seen a large moving truck parked outside one early morning. But strangely, ever since that day, I had never seen them. Not even a glimpse. Not a face. Not a silhouette. I wondered. Perhaps they were busy people, leaving early for work and returning late? Or perhaps they were introverts, preferring absolute privacy. Either way, I respected their choice. Until the sounds began. They always appeared at night. Not the usual noise of a new family, cleaning, or children playing, but other sounds. Strange sounds, which made me pay attention. First was the music. It wasn't normal music. It was distorted, warped, as if coming from a broken old record player, or a corrupted recording. Its melody was eerie, following no familiar tune. Sometimes it was hauntingly melodic. Other times it grated, filled with harshness, making me feel uneasy and a chill run down my spine. It was like music not meant for ordinary human ears, music from another world. I tried to ignore it. I put on my headphones, played my own music, or simply tried to focus on my book. But that music, though distorted, still seemed to seep through the thin walls, permeating my quiet space. Then came other sounds, muffled thuds, as if heavy objects were falling or someone was dragging something across the floor. Not footsteps, it was heavier, duller. These thuds often accompanied the distorted music, forming a strange combination that made me think of ancient rituals or unnamed mysteries. And finally, the sound that chilled me the most, scraping. A horrifying sound, as if something sharp was scraping against a hard surface. It wasn't the sound of fingernails or an animal's claws. It had a sharpness, a continuity, as if someone was trying to do something with some material. This scraping often rang out during moments when the distorted music subsided, creating a terrifying contrast that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. Every night I listened to these sounds. They became a familiar, though unsettling and disturbing part of my nights. I didn't dare go outside to investigate, partly because I respected their privacy, partly because a vague fear had begun to form within me. I wondered, were these sounds human or something else? I started having trouble sleeping. During long nights, I tossed and turned, listening to every sound from next door. I tried to find a logical explanation. Perhaps they were artists, creating some abstract art form, or perhaps they were artisans working with strange materials. But these explanations still couldn't dispel the chill in my mind. Until one morning. It was a Saturday morning, still pre-dawn. I woke up earlier than usual, perhaps because the sounds from the night before had prevented me from sleeping deeply. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. And then, I froze. Right, outside my front door. On the doorstep, a small object lay there. Something that shouldn't have been there. It was a small hand-carved wooden doll. It was tiny, only the size of a child's hand. The dark wood was crudely carved, yet very meticulously. It had a simple face without many detailed features. But its eyes were black and vacant, like two deep, hollow pits, no pupils, no whites. They stared straight at me, a lifeless, cold gaze, and its tiny hands. They were clasped together, as if in prayer. I froze. The blood in my veins felt like ice. My breath caught in my throat. My heart skipped a beat, then pounded wildly, frantically, as if trying to burst from my chest. A horrifying scream was trapped in my throat, unable to escape. Who had put it here? I looked around. The street was deserted. The surrounding houses were still silent in the dark. No one was there. I stared at the doll. It lay still, inanimate, yet carried a terrifying vitality. A vitality that came from its empty black eyes and its praying hands. The chill was stronger than ever. This was not a gift. This was a message. A message from the mysterious neighbors, the ones I had never seen. I didn't dare to touch the doll. It seemed to emit a cold aura, a strange unease. I retreated, slamming the door shut. I locked all the bolts, drew the curtains. I didn't want to see it anymore. I sank to the floor, my back against the door. My entire body trembled uncontrollably. A barrage of questions swirled in my mind. Why did they put it here? What did it mean? Was it a warning or an invitation? I couldn't fall back asleep. For the rest of the morning, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, staring at the door. I was afraid. Afraid of the new neighbors, afraid of the strange sounds at night, and afraid of the wooden doll with its empty black eyes and praying hands. When the sun rose high, I felt a little calmer. I thought, maybe it was just a child's prank, or an item that fell during the move. I tried to find a logical explanation, though my heart was still full of unease. I slowly opened the door, looking down at the doorstep. The doll was still there, lying still exactly as I had seen it. I took a tissue, gently picking up the doll. It was cold, heavy. The rough wood touched my fingertips. I examined it closely again. Though simply carved, every line on its face, on its hands, was meticulous. full of a strange life, as if the carver had imbued a part of their soul into it. I didn't know what to do with it. Throw it away or keep it. Finally, I decided to place it in a small box, then store it deep inside my wardrobe, behind old clothes. I wanted to forget about it. I wanted to forget about the strange sounds and the eerie presence of the new neighbors. But that was impossible. Every night, the sounds would begin again. The distorted music, the thudding, and the horrifying scraping. They echoed through the silent space of the night, a constant reminder of the mysterious neighbor's existence. I no longer dared to look out the window at night. I drew the curtains tightly, kept the nightlight bright, trying to read a book or watch TV to ward off the terrifying thoughts. And sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something. A shadow flitting past the window of the house next door. Something tall, slender, moving slowly in the dim light. I didn't dare to look clearly. Just a fleeting glimpse. And then it disappeared. My fear gradually turned into an obsession. I started to change my daily routine. I avoided going out at night. I always checked the doors thoroughly, even adding an extra lock. I felt like I was living in a horror movie where fear always lurked right next to me. And then, another morning. I woke up and went to the kitchen to make coffee. As I passed the wardrobe, I felt a strange urge to check the box. I opened the wardrobe, pulled out the box. The box was still closed, but inside, the wooden doll was no longer there. My heart skipped a beat. I rubbed my eyes, searched, but couldn't find it. It had mysteriously disappeared, leaving no trace. Absolute terror washed over me again. It wasn't just an inanimate object anymore. It could move, it could appear and disappear. I sank to the floor, feeling helpless. I didn't know what to do anymore. The mysterious neighbors, the strange sounds, and now the ghostly doll. Everything seemed to be closing in on me, pushing me into a corner. I couldn't live with this fear anymore. I had to face it. I decided to do what I had never dared to do. I would go and knock on their door. Thinking about it, I felt a shiver. But this was the only way to find out the truth. I waited until the sun was high, and I felt brave enough. I got dressed, took a deep breath, and walked out of my house. I walked towards the house next door. Everything was still silent. The curtains were drawn. No lights, not a sound. It looked like an abandoned house, though I knew for sure someone lived there. I stepped onto the doorstep, my heart pounding in my chest. I raised my hand, intending to knock, but just as my fingers were inches from the door, I froze. A small object lay on their doorstep. It was my wooden doll. It lay there, exactly as I had seen it at my door this morning. Its empty black eyes stared straight at me. Its tiny hands clasped together as if in prayer. And then I noticed something else. Something I had never paid attention to before. Right next to the doll, on the doorstep, there was a long, thin, sharp scratch mark on the old paint, as if something sharp had just been dragged across it. I immediately recoiled. A cold sensation ran down my spine. The scraping sound. That was the scraping sound I had heard every night. It wasn't someone working with wood. It was this doll. This doll was moving, scraping across the floor, and it had brought itself here. I stood there, motionless, staring at the doll on the neighbor's doorstep. All the pieces fit together. The distorted music, the thudding of heavy objects, and the horrifying scraping. It was all connected to this doll. It wasn't a family. It was something else. Something that had been locked in that house, and now it wanted to get out. I didn't dare to knock anymore. I turned around, ran back to my house, and slammed the door shut. I locked all the bolts, drew the curtains. I felt as if I was being hunted by something invisible. All that day, I didn't dare to leave the house. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, trying to think, trying to find an explanation. When night fell, I felt an extreme fear again. I knew the sounds would come again, and I knew the doll could appear at any moment. I sat on the sofa, clutching a kitchen knife. I didn't know if it would help, but I needed something to reassure myself. And then, as expected, the sounds began. The distorted music rang out, louder, closer this time. The thudding too, more rapid, and the scraping now became very clear, very close, as if it was scraping right next to my living room wall. I held my breath, listening. The scraping continued steadily, beat by beat. It didn't stop. And then I heard a small crack, then another crack, as if something was breaking. I stood up, slowly approaching the wall separating my house from the neighbors. I pressed my ear against the wall. The scraping was even clearer, and I heard a breath, a heavy, ragged breathing. Not the breathing of a human. It was a raw, wheezing breath, full of distress. And then, amidst the scraping and the breathing, I heard it, a muttering, not words, but a strange, meaningless sound, as if someone was trying to speak but couldn't form clear words. It carried a despair, a suffering. A chill enveloped me. I knew what was happening. The doll wasn't a haunted toy. It was a tool to release something. And it was right next to me. It was breaking through the wall. I recoiled from the wall, my hand trembling as I gripped the knife. I didn't know what I would face, but I knew I had no other choice. I wouldn't run. I would face it. I waited. The scraping continued. The breathing was rapid. The muttering continued. Until suddenly everything stopped. An absolute silence enveloped the room. I held my breath, listening. Not a sound. And then I saw it. Not on the wall, but right at my living room door. A dark shadow. A tall, slender figure, standing silently in the doorway, blocking the dim light from outside. I couldn't see clearly, but I knew it was there. I felt a cold aura radiating from it, a terrifying presence, not human. I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt it staring at me. And then I heard it. Not the ragged breathing, not the giggle, but a voice, a deep, hoarse voice, like the grinding of rotten wood. "You are next," I screamed. The scream tore through the night. I squeezed my eyes shut, raised the knife, slashing wildly at the empty air. When I opened my eyes, there was nothing. The shadow had vanished. The door was still closed. Only silence and absolute terror. From that night on, I never heard any sounds from the neighbor's house again. No music, no thudding, no scraping, and I never found the wooden doll again. But I knew I was no longer at peace. Every night I lie in bed, closing my eyes. I try to sleep, but I can't, because I still hear it. Not with my ears, but with my mind. The hoarse muttering, and that chilling phrase. "You are next." They are still there. They still echo in my head, and sometimes, in the still of the night, I feel a cold breath on my neck, as if someone is standing right behind me and whispering chillingly. I no longer believe in peaceful sleep. Every night I sink into a restless world where that voice is always present. And so, I live with the haunting, not knowing when it will end, or if it will ever end. The house next door is still silent. The curtains are still drawn. Not a sign of life. But I know it's still there, and it's waiting for me. The wayward watch. The soft glow of my bedside lamp cast a warm, comforting light across my bedroom. I was tucked into bed, a heavy blanket pulled up to my chin, the gentle hum of the air conditioner a soothing backdrop to the quiet night. My apartment, nestled in a quiet alley of Hanoi, always felt like a sanctuary after a long day. Most nights, sleep came easily, a welcome escape into the quiet world of dreams. But for the past week, a strange series of events had kept me on edge, disrupting my usual peaceful routine. My most prized possession, a truly unique antique watch, rested on my nightstand. It wasn't just any watch. It was a family heirloom, passed down from my great-grandfather. Its silver casing was intricately engraved with swirling patterns, and the Roman numerals on its faded face seemed to whisper stories of forgotten times. The watch didn't have a second hand, only a minute and an hour hand, moving with a deliberate, almost contemplative tick. I adored it not just for its beauty, but for the connection it offered to my family's history. Every night, before I drifted off, I'd wind its small crown, listening to the satisfying click as the gears engaged. It was a ritual, a small moment of quiet reverence before sleep claimed me. For years, that watch had stayed put on my nightstand, a constant, comforting presence. It was the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes in the morning, its antique charm a gentle welcome to a new day. But that had changed. It started subtly, about a week ago. I woke up one morning, stretched, and glanced at my nightstand. The watch wasn't there. My heart gave a little flutter of panic. I sat up, looking around, and there it was, resting neatly on my pillow just an inch from my head. I stared at it, bewildered. Had I moved it in my sleep? It seemed unlikely. I was a relatively still sleeper. I picked it up, feeling a strange mix of confusion and a faint prickle of unease. I placed it back on the nightstand, making sure it was securely positioned. The next morning, the same thing. I woke up, and the watch was gone from the nightstand. This time, I found it on the floor, nestled under my bed. Again, I was puzzled. How could it have gotten there? I live alone. No, one else had access to my apartment. I meticulously cleaned my space, so it wasn't as if it had simply rolled off the table unnoticed. I returned it to its rightful place, a growing sense of discomfort settling in. This pattern continued. Each morning, the watch would be in a new, unexpected spot. One day, it was sitting precariously on the edge of my bookshelf, as if it had been placed there by an invisible hand. Another morning, I found it tucked inside my left shoe, which was neatly lined up by the door. That one really unsettled me. The idea of it being inside my shoe, a personal item, felt invasive. I'd carefully put it back on the nightstand, telling myself it was just a strange coincidence, or perhaps I was doing it unconsciously in my sleep. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I was always fully aware of my actions before bed, and I certainly wasn't moving my prized possession. The bizarre occurrences made my nights restless. I'd lie awake, staring at the watch on my nightstand, trying to understand. Was it a prank? A dream? Or something else entirely? The peaceful quiet of my apartment now felt charged with an unspoken tension. I'd drift off, only to wake with a start, convinced I heard a faint tick-tock from somewhere other than its usual spot. Tonight, the thought of finding the watch in another strange place filled me with a heavy dread. I couldn't bear the thought of another morning filled with confusion and unease. I needed to put an end to this. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind, and that this watch wasn't just moving on its own. As I got ready for bed, I performed my usual ritual of winding the watch. Its familiar click was a small comfort, but a new resolve hardened my gaze. I wouldn't leave it on the nightstand tonight. I needed to hide it, somewhere secure, somewhere it absolutely couldn't move from on its own. I walked over to my old wooden dresser. It had a deep bottom drawer, rarely used, that had a small, somewhat stiff lock on it. It wasn't the most secure lock, but it was enough to deter any casual movement, even my own hypothetical sleepwalking attempts. I opened the drawer, which groaned slightly, and reached inside. I gently placed the watch in a small velvet pouch, the very pouch it came in, and tucked it deep into the corner of the drawer under a pile of old scarves. Then I closed the drawer with a firm push, and with a satisfying click, I turned the tiny key, locking it. I even tested it, pulling on the handle to make sure it was truly secure. It wouldn't open. I took the small key, and to be extra cautious, I placed it under my pillow, directly beneath my head. That way, if the drawer were to open, I would know. I would feel it. A sigh of relief escaped my lips. There, it was hidden. It was locked away. Surely this would stop the madness. I felt a rare sense of peace settle over me as I finally climbed into bed. The faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant city sounds were now truly soothing. I closed my eyes, confident that tomorrow morning, the watch would remain exactly where I had left it. Sleep, for the first time in a week, felt genuinely inviting. I drifted off into a deep, dreamless sleep. My body felt heavy, relaxed, sinking into the soft mattress. The silence of the night enveloped me, a comforting blanket. And then a sound, not the distant rumble of a car, nor the gentle whir of the fan. This sound was close, very close. It was a tick-tock, loud, unmistakable. My eyes snapped open. The room was still dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. But that sound, it was right there. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It was impossibly loud, too loud for a small antique watch. It was as if the watch itself had grown in size, or was somehow amplified, its internal workings roaring in the stillness of the room. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. I lay still, my breath hitched in my throat, trying to pinpoint the source of the deafening sound. And then I felt it. A distinct, cool weight on my chest. My blood ran cold. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The sound was coming from right on top of me. I slowly, very slowly, tilted my head down. In the dim light, resting squarely on my chest, almost directly over my heart, was the watch. My antique watch. The one I had meticulously hidden. The one I had locked securely in a drawer. The one whose key was currently tucked safely under my pillow. It lay there, its silver casing gleaming faintly in the gloom, its hands moving with a deliberate, rhythmic tick-tock. The sound filled the entire room, reverberating through my very bones. It wasn't just ticking, it was practically roaring. My body froze, every muscle, every nerve locked in place. A horrifying scream was trapped in my throat, unable to escape. My mind reeled, trying to comprehend the impossible. How? How could it be here? The drawer was locked. The key was under my head. I stared at the watch. Its faded face seemed to glow with a faint internal light. The Roman numerals, usually elegant, now seemed to twist and writhe in the dimness, mocking me. The hands moved, inexorably, charting the passage of time, yet defying all laws of physics. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The sound was relentless, a metronome of pure terror. It wasn't just loud, it felt inside me, echoing in my skull, in my very soul. I felt a profound sense of violation. My most prized possession, the one I cherished, had not only defied my attempts to control it, but had invaded my personal space, my very body, in the deepest hours of the night. It felt malicious, deliberate. I couldn't move. My arms were pinned to my sides, my legs stiff. It was as if an invisible force was holding me down, forcing me to bear witness to this impossible occurrence. The helplessness deepened my fear, pushing me to the brink of panic. Time stretched, became meaningless. Each deafening tick-tock was an eternity. I didn't know what it would do. Would it just lie there? Would it do something else? These terrifying questions gnawed at my mind, instilling unspeakable dread. I stared at the watch, at its indifferent, ceaseless movement, and I began to sense something else. Not just fear. There was a strange coldness radiating from it, an emptiness. As if it wasn't just a watch, but something that had been awakened, something ancient and powerful. And then, I noticed a subtle detail on its silver casing. The intricate engraving seemed to shift, to become more defined, almost pulsing faintly, with an inner light. It was as if the watch itself was alive, breathing with each deafening tick. I held my breath. What was happening? Who was doing this? In the quiet space, I felt a change. The watch was no longer just a simple object. It seemed to be vibrating faintly on my chest, a low hum accompanying the tick-tock, a vibration that resonated with my own heartbeat. In desperation, I tried with all my might to break free from the paralysis. I strained, putting all my will into moving. I wanted to throw the watch off me, to jump up, to run away, to do anything to escape this terrifying presence. And then, a small movement. One of my fingers twitched slightly. The paralysis began to loosen its grip. I slowly regained control of my body. I managed a deep, cold breath. I blinked, opened my eyes. The watch was still there, still ticking loudly, but the vibrations seemed to lessen. The light from its engravings dimmed slightly. With a sudden burst of strength, I lurched upwards, dislodging the watch from my chest. It clattered onto the bed, the loud ticking suddenly sounding a fraction fainter. I scrambled backward, pulling the blanket up to my chin, my body trembling. I reached out, fumbling for my phone on the nightstand. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold it. I found the flashlight function and blasted the room with bright light. The sudden illumination dispelled the hazy shadows, but did little to ease my terror. I stared at the watch, now lying innocently on my crumpled sheets, its tick-tock still audible, but no longer deafening. I looked at the dresser drawer. It was still closed, still locked. I fumbled under my pillow. The key was still there. How? My mind screamed. It was impossible. It defied all logic, all reason. I couldn't fall back asleep. For the rest of the night, I sat on my bed with every light on, staring at the watch. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of it resting on my chest, ticking relentlessly, reappeared. The next day, I was a wreck, exhausted, disoriented, haunted. I tried to act normal, went to work, but my mind was a fog of fear and confusion. I kept replaying the events of the night, searching for an explanation, for a crack in my sanity. I began researching strange phenomena, stories of objects moving on their own, of haunted artifacts. I read about poltergeists, about objects imbued with spirits. A part of me remained skeptical, clinging to the hope of a rational explanation. But a larger part felt that what I had witnessed was undeniably real. As night approached, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The thought of returning to my bedroom, to that bed, filled me with cold fear. My apartment, once a safe haven, now felt like a cage, a place where I was being tormented by an unseen force. I tried to create a protective barrier. I bought a heavy wooden box with a strong clasp. I placed the watch inside, wrapped it in several layers of thick cloth, and then put the box inside a locked metal safe. I even scattered some salt around the safe, as I'd read it might deter spirits. I wanted to banish it, to contain it, to make it stop. I lay down on my bed, but I couldn't close my eyes. I knew it would come again. I lay still, listening, waiting. And indeed, after a terrifying silence that stretched for what felt like hours, the sound returned. Not a tick-tock this time. It was a faint, almost imperceptible clink. It came from the direction of the safe. A metallic sound, muffled, as if something was rattling inside. I held my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. The light from my bedside lamp seemed to dim, casting long, dancing shadows. Then another clink, louder, more distinct, and then a tiny, almost inaudible creak. like a hinge slowly opening. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against my ears. No, please no. But I couldn't block it out. I could feel its presence. A cold, heavy presence that seeped into the very air of the room. I opened my eyes. The safe door was slightly ajar, just a tiny crack, but enough to see a sliver of darkness within. And from that crack, I heard it. The tick-tock. Loud, unmistakable. As if the watch was ticking right inside the safe, roaring its defiance. My body trembled violently. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but I was frozen in fear. The tick-tock grew louder, more insistent. It felt like it was mocking me, laughing at my futile attempts to contain it. And then, the safe door slowly, agonizingly slowly began to open wider. A thin, dark gap appeared. And from that gap, I saw it. A faint, almost ethereal glow. The same glow I had seen from the engravings on the watch face. The safe door opened further with a soft, drawn-out creak. And there it was. The watch. It wasn't inside the velvet pouch. It wasn't even inside the safe nestled in the corner. It was floating in the air, just above the open safe door, its silver casing gleaming faintly in the dim light, its hands moving with a deliberate, rhythmic tick-tock. The sound filled the entire room, reverberating through my very bones. My scream finally erupted, tearing through the silence of the night. I scrambled backward, falling off the bed, clutching my head. It was real. All of it was real. The watch hovered there for a moment, ticking loudly, its glowing engravings pulsing with a faint, malevolent light. It seemed to be observing me, its silent presence filled with an ancient, knowing power. And then, with a soft, almost inaudible thump, it landed gently on the floor beside the safe. The ticking immediately softened, becoming a normal, faint tick-tock. The glow from its engravings faded. It lay there, an innocent antique watch, as if nothing had happened. But I knew. I knew what I had witnessed. I couldn't sleep. I spent the rest of the night curled up in a corner of my living room, every light on, staring at the closed bedroom door. The faint tick-tock of the watch, even from a distance, echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of its presence. The next day, I was a shell of myself. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus. I knew I couldn't live in that apartment anymore. I couldn't live with the watch. I packed a small bag, just the essentials. I left everything else behind, including the watch. I didn't dare touch it again. I just left it there, on the bedroom floor, a silent testament to the horror I had experienced. I moved to a new city, started a new life. I changed my phone number, cut ties with old friends. I tried to erase everything, to build a wall between myself and that night. But I couldn't. Sometimes in the dead of night, when the world is quiet and still, I hear it. Not with my ears, but with my mind. The faint, rhythmic tick-tock. It's always there. A phantom sound. A ghostly echo of that night. And sometimes I feel a strange, cool pressure on my chest when I wake up. A fleeting sensation, gone as quickly as it comes. I never bought another antique watch. I never leave anything on my nightstand. And I always make sure my bedroom door is locked. Because I know that watch is still out there, still ticking, still moving. And sometimes I wonder if it's still looking for me, if it's still coming for me. And I close my eyes, trying to fall asleep, knowing that somewhere that antique watch is ticking loudly, waiting, always waiting. The figure at the end of the hall. That night, I drifted into a restless sleep. The cold winter winds of Hanoi seeped through the old window frames of my apartment building, carrying dampness and a biting chill. I usually sleep very deeply, but lately a vague unease had been lingering in my mind, keeping me tossing and turning. I lay in bed, curled up in my thick duvet, trying to breathe evenly, counting sheep as an old habit. The small electric heater hummed softly, creating a steady, murmuring sound like a lullaby. I felt my eyelids grow heavy, and my mind gradually drifted into a drowsy state on the border between waking and sleeping. And then I felt an uncomfortable coldness, not the usual cold of a winter night, but a piercing, bone-chilling draft, as if a door was wide open somewhere in the apartment. It seeped through the thick blanket, making me shiver. I stirred, opening my eyes. The room was still pitch black, with only the faint light from the streetlights filtering through the curtain gap. I checked the clock on my bedside table. 3:15 a.m. It was well past midnight. The wind whistled louder. I frowned. I must have forgotten to close the living room window. This oversight annoyed me. Though I wanted to stay huddled in my warm blanket, the biting cold persisted. I decided to get out of bed to close the window. I slid my feet onto the cold wooden floor, a shiver running down my spine. I took slow steps, fumbling in the familiar darkness of the apartment. The soft shuffle of my slippers on the wooden floor echoed steadily, breaking the silence of the late night. I walked past the bedroom, past the study, and then I turned into the hallway leading to the living room. My hallway is quite long, leading straight to the large window overlooking the city. The hallway lights are always off at night. So, it was plunged into a thick darkness, with only faint light from the end of the hallway, where the living room window was, casting in. And then, I saw it. At the very end of the hallway, where the faint light from the window fell, a tall, gaunt figure stood there. It stood perfectly still, completely motionless. Just a mere shadow, almost devoid of detail. Just a tall, slender, human-shaped mass, almost blending into the darkness. I froze. The blood in my veins felt like ice. My heart skipped a beat, then pounded wildly, frantically, as if trying to burst from my chest. My breath caught in my throat. A horrifying scream was trapped in my throat, unable to escape. Someone was in my house. But who was it? And why was it standing there? I stared at the figure. It stood perfectly still, unmoving, completely motionless, with its back to me. I tried to find a logical explanation. Perhaps it was the coat rack, or a drying rack I had forgotten to put away. But no, the shape was clearly human, too tall and slender to be anything else. I held my breath, trying to control the surging fear. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling, hoarse. "Who's there?" The echo of my voice rang in the silent hallway, then dissipated into the air. The figure didn't move. Still standing there, perfectly still, with its back to me. A shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't human. A human wouldn't stand so silently after being called. I felt a strong urge to turn around and run back to my bedroom, lock the door, hide under the covers. But a strange curiosity, mixed with fear, held me rooted to the spot. I wanted to know what it was, wanted to know why it was here. I took a deep breath, gathering all my courage. I took a step forward. The soft shuffle of my slippers echoed clearly in the silence. As soon as my foot touched the floor, a slow change began to unfold in the figure at the end of the hallway. Its head slowly, very slowly, began to rotate. Not turning to one side, like a normal person, but rotating in a horrifying, unnatural way. Rotating 180 degrees. It spun on its neck slowly, as if being controlled by an invisible string. There was no sound of creaking bones, only a terrifying silence, and the slow, unbelievable rotation. I froze, my eyes wide with horror. I saw it. Its head continued to spin until it was completely facing me, and then I saw its face. There was no face, only two black, empty eye sockets, like two deep, hollow pits, no pupils, no whites. They stared straight at me, a lifeless, cold gaze, yet carrying a strange, terrifying understanding. It had no mouth, no nose, just two dark, empty eye sockets and a tall, gaunt form standing silently in the gloom. Absolute terror washed over me, more powerfully than any feeling I had ever experienced. I wanted to scream, to jump up and run away, but my body was completely immobile. I felt as if an invisible weight was pressing me down onto the floor. Helplessness surged, deepening my fear even more. I stared at the figure, at its empty black eye sockets. I felt a cold aura radiating from it, a bone-chilling, icy cold, not the cold of temperature, but a cold that seeped deep into my mind as if it carried some secret, an unforgivable secret. Although it didn't move, didn't make a sound, I felt a very strong presence from it, as if it was observing me, assessing me, searching for something. Time seemed to stand still. I stood there, motionless, staring at the figure at the end of the hall. It stood perfectly still, yet exuded a terrifying vibrancy. In despair, I tried to focus all my will to break free from the paralysis. I strained, putting all my strength into moving. I wanted to bolt, to do anything to escape this sight. And then, one of my fingers twitched slightly. The paralysis began to loosen its grip. I slowly regained control of my body. I jolted upright, taking a few steps back, stumbling, over the threshold of my study door. I collapsed onto the floor, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. I closed my eyes, shook my head repeatedly, trying to erase that horrifying image from my mind. I opened my eyes, looking towards the end of the hallway. There was nothing there. The figure had vanished. The hallway was plunged back into silent darkness, with only faint light from the window, as if it had never been there. But I knew. I knew what I had seen was real. I crawled up, turning on all the lights in the hallway. The blinding light dispelled all shadows, all hidden corners. I stared intently at the end of the hallway. Nothing unusual. Everything was still the same. I didn't dare to turn off the lights again. I walked through the entire apartment, turning on all the lights. I checked every nook and cranny. Opened closets, looked under the bed. Nothing. The doors were locked. No signs of forced entry. So, what had happened? I returned to my bedroom, collapsing onto the bed. My whole body was still trembling. A barrage of questions swirled in my mind. What was it? Why did it appear? Why did it look at me like that? I couldn't fall back asleep. For the rest of the night, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, trying to read a book, trying to do anything to ward off that obsession. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the tall, gaunt figure with its head rotated 180 degrees and its empty black eyes staring directly at me. The next day, I was still shaken. I tried to act normal, went to work, talked to colleagues, but my mind couldn't stop thinking about the figure at the end of the hall. I wondered, had I seen something supernatural? Or was it just a hallucination of someone too tired and stressed? I began researching strange stories about ghostly phenomena. I read about legends of spirits, about unseen entities. A part of me remained skeptical, but a part felt that what I had witnessed was real. As night approached, I felt an unusual tension. I hesitated to enter the hallway. The familiar hallway had now become a gateway to terror. I tried to create a safe space. I turned on all the lights in the apartment, drew the window curtains tightly shut. I even placed a few spiritual items I had been given on my bedside table as a way to reassure myself. I lay down on the bed, but couldn't close my eyes. I knew it would come again. I lay still, listening, waiting. And indeed, after a terrifying silence that stretched for what felt like hours, I felt it again. The bone-chilling draft. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the hallway. I held my breath. I didn't dare to move. The wind whistled, louder, And then I felt a change. A cold, heavy presence drawing closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push away the fear. I silently recited prayers, begged. This was surely a nightmare, a product of my imagination playing tricks on me. But the feeling was too real. The presence was too clear. I opened my eyes. The room was still brightly lit. I still lay there, motionless. And the bone-chilling draft, that heavy presence, was right at my bedroom door. I knew it was there. It was standing right at the threshold, looking at me. I knew it had turned its head, and its empty black eyes were staring directly at me. Time seemed to stop. Every passing second felt like an eternity. I didn't know what it would do. Would it attack me, or simply stand there tormenting me with its terrifying presence? I felt a surge of despair. I couldn't escape, couldn't do anything. I could only lie still, listening to that bone-chilling draft and feeling its terrifying presence right at my bedroom door. And then, suddenly, the bone-chilling draft weakened. The heavy presence also vanished. An absolute silence enveloped the room. I still lay there, not daring to move. My heart still pounded in my chest. My breathing was ragged, gasping. I waited for another sound, waited for an appearance. But there was nothing, only a terrifying stillness. I slowly got up, looking towards the bedroom door. There was nothing there. The door was still ajar as I had left it. The hallway was still brightly lit. But I knew it had been there. From that night on, I no longer felt any bone-chilling drafts, no more heavy presences. But I knew I was no longer at peace. Every night I lie in bed, closing my eyes. I try to sleep, but I can't, because I still see it, not with my eyes, but with my mind. The tall, gaunt figure with its head rotated 180 degrees, and its empty black eyes, they are still there. They still exist in my mind. And sometimes, in the still of the night, I feel a cold breath on my face, as if someone is leaning in close to me and staring at me in the dark. I no longer believe in peaceful sleep. Every night, I sink into a restless world, where that figure is always present. And so, I live with the haunting, not knowing when it will end or if it will ever end. My apartment is still as quiet as ever, but I know it's no longer a safe place. And I know it's still there. It's still somewhere in this apartment. And it's waiting for me.